What is keeping Bitcoin from breaking out this year the way it had last year?
Yeah, one of the big things that is very obvious with Bitcoin is that the supply demand mechanisms are very well understood. And so you can actually go ahead and check on the on-chain metrics where the supply is and how illiquid. And what we're watching is exactly what we actually saw in 2020, and then again in the summer of 2021, right before the big run up, is that more and more long-term holders are acquiring Bitcoin. They're taking it off of exchanges. Miners are acquiring Bitcoin. They are not selling what they're mining. And so you're getting this highly illiquid supply that once a catalyst hits, regardless of what it is, whether it comes from the macro environment, whether it comes from a big buyer of Bitcoin, could be one of many, many things. That catalyst will go ahead and kind of ignite this underlying illiquid market. And I would expect to see a very big move in the Bitcoin price. Now, when that happens is the big question. Will that happen in the coming weeks? Will it take months to happen? Nobody knows. But whenever we get in these lulls where people are taking the supply off the market and it's becoming highly illiquid, that's where we see those parabolic moves happen shortly afterwards.
I'm kind of curious not just about the liquid markets generally. I'm curious about the private markets here. You had been tweeting about the Bored Ape Yacht Club creator, Yuga Labs, raising $450 million in a seed round, a big seed round. Why do you think that the private space is garnering so much money, and what do you think about the private valuations here?
I think there's two things happening. One, if you're investing in bonds, you're losing. If you're holding cash, you're losing. So people have to go to the private market. They have to push out on the risk curve. That's exactly what they're doing. The second thing is this is a generational trait. If you want to get asymmetric returns, you have to go and invest in Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. You have to invest in the infrastructure. You have to invest in the liquid assets. And that's what every single great investor is doing. And so the ones that are still sitting out from this market, frankly, they're just going to be left behind. And I think that seeing this $450 million round is a perfect example. If you look at the Yuga Labs financials, they're mind blowing. These guys are operating with a 92% margin. Their company is less than 2 years old, and they've got 9 figures of revenue. Anybody on the planet who would see those types of financial metrics would be excited about investing in this type of business with this type of momentum. And so I think that there's plenty of people who point at the industry, they laugh, they don't understand it. But what I do know is that the world's wealthiest people, not the future wealthiest, the world's wealthiest people today are crypto investors. And my guess is that over time, the Forbes 400 is going to be dominated by Bitcoin and crypto investors. And so if you want to be part of that, you should get into the industry.
Given the prominent role that crypto is playing in the war on Ukraine, and especially in providing humanitarian aid, along with President Biden's executive order, why don't you think Bitcoin has broken out in a bigger way?
Well, Bitcoin's up 25% since Russia invaded Ukraine. And so ultimately, people tend to look at, since it's so volatile, it's hard to lose track of what's happened in just a matter of weeks. But it's up 25%. It's outperformed every other asset that people would look at in these types of scenarios. We just don't think about that as it's been trading in that range. And so I think that watching what has happened on the Ukraine situation is a perfect example. They raised over $100 million from Bitcoin and crypto investors around the world. That's more than most countries gave to Ukraine. And so when you start to see this, how did they do it? They literally just posted a wallet address on the internet, and that's just the donations directly to the government. As Alex Gladstein from the Human Rights Foundation pointed out, that doesn't even include the NGOs or any of the non-government type organizations that also got those donations. And so I ultimately think that what people are waking up to is these payment rails are superior to every other payment rail in the world. Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are good for business, and that's true for individuals, that's true for corporations, that's true for nation states. And whether we're talking about nation states like El Salvador, the United States, where the president and his administration has now said he wants to be a global leader, or we're talking about a country that is literally being invaded by a nuclear-armed adversary. Every single person needs this technology, and if you don't adopt it, somebody else will, and you will be at a disadvantage.
Now, to new investors, it's really Bitcoin, Ethereum, and everyone else. There are thousands of other cryptocurrencies out there. I recently spoke with Michael Saylor of MicroStrategy, the world's biggest corporate holder of Bitcoin, as far as we know, and asked if we're going to see massive consolidation in this market, how many cryptocurrencies actually exist 5 years from now. Take a listen to what he had to say.
This is a rotation from an entrepreneurial-driven industry to an institutionally driven industry. And we're sitting at this point where we're crossing the chasm. And the question is, which entrepreneurs will be institutionalized and come public? There will be a shakeout, and obviously 6,500 currencies are not going to be around here in a decade.
What do you think the crypto industry looks like in 5 years? How many cryptocurrencies actually survive, and which ones are they?
Yeah, look, I think that he's dead on, right? Anytime you have brand new technology, you have tons of intellectual capital and financial capital flowing into an industry like this, you're going to get a lot of folks who are experimenting. They're trying things. But the truth is that most of them don't last. And if we go back to the late 90s as an example, all the ideas were right: streaming music, food delivery, etc. But those first iterations, most of them did not work. And it took another decade before the infrastructure was in place. People understood the technologies. There was the consumer behavior kind of transition. And I think the same thing's going to happen here. Now, the beauty of this is something like Bitcoin specifically as a digital currency. This is not the first attempt at this. For over 40 years, the cypherpunk movement has been trying to create digital currency. And finally, on iteration 8, 9, 10, whatever Bitcoin ended up being, now it is actually struck and is receiving global adoption. The same thing is likely to happen in many of these other ideas. It's just going to take a while for us to get there.
So you're somebody that's moved to Miami, a place that, you know, the mayor has been very openly accepting cryptocurrencies in the community. To what extent, Pomp, are you seeing other cities and states truly adopt cryptocurrencies as a form of payment, as a form of ways of accepting taxes, and welcoming some more of the community there?
Yeah, look, I think that Miami is the shining example of what freedom and leadership is in the United States today. This is the last place in the world where socialism is going to take hold. And I think that what we're watching play out here is a resurgence in the fact that leadership does matter. And so what Mayor Suarez has done is he has taken a city that most people, frankly, didn't even know existed outside of Miami Beach and kind of the South Beach tourism area. And he has revitalized it by putting a flag in the ground and basically promising one thing: I'm going to cheer for your success and do everything I can to help you be successful. And the sad part is that that is a message that is exactly 180 degrees different than most people have been hearing in places like New York City or in various cities across California. And so I think that Bitcoin is a big part of that story. It's not the only part of the story. And what you're now watching is that politicians are realizing, both at the local, state, and federal level, that Bitcoin is good for their campaigns. It's good for business. I have had literally tens of different politicians who are running for various positions across the political spectrum in this next election reach out. And their leading message is, I'm pro-Bitcoin, I'm pro-crypto. But that is no longer something that makes you stand out. If you are anti these technologies, you're basically going against tens of millions of Americans where they're choosing to store their wealth. You will not get elected. And if you're anti-crypto and you're in a current seat, you will be voted out. And I think politicians are both looking at this as a carrot and a stick. It's a carrot because you'll get the support of the community if you're pro the technology, and it's a stick because if you are anti these technologies, they'll meme you to death on Twitter and they'll vote you out of office.